Hello and welcome to North 100, a Canadian Highlander podcast. I'm Serge. Joining me today, I have a Jer.
Hello.
And a Wheeler.
Babadoo.
Reminder, North 100 is brought to you by you. Your support of the Patreon over at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. Welcome to part 2 of our Strixhaven set review. Today we're going to be focusing on black, green, and land cards. If you had any questions or thought we missed any cards on the previous episode, please let us know down in the comments. And a reminder that when we do our set reviews, these are not exhaustive. We don't go over every card in the set. Instead, we focus on cards from a Canadian Highlander point of view and only the cards that we think are relevant to the format. So without further ado, let's jump on into it and talk about Baleful Mastery. This is a 4-mana instant for 3 and a black. You may pay 1 and a black rather than pay the spell's mana cost, but if 1 and a black was paid, an opponent draws a card. Exile target creature or planeswalker. Hey, Jer, what do you think?
I absolutely love this card. It's great in a bunch of different circumstances, mostly when your opponent has creatures or planeswalkers. It can either be very cheap or at card disadvantage, or it can be a little more expensive at card parity. But I just think the ability to exile any creature or any planeswalker for such a low cost, easily splashable, is not only good but necessary, and we need to see more of these cards going forward. And this is a fantastic addition to the repertoire of cards we already had that did this.
Let's jump on into Kallus Blood Mage then. This is a 3-mana 2/1 vampire warlock for 2 and a black. When it enters the battlefield, choose 1. You can create a 1/1 black and green Pest token, and Pest say when this creature dies, gain a life. You may draw a card and lose a life, or exile target player's graveyard. What do you think, Wheeler?
So there are 3 modes on the card that all just kind of provide an effect that you don't necessarily, want to include this card in for just that. But this is singleton. And so having flexibility on a cheap creature, especially one that is really easy to cast, is pretty cool and good. I'm mostly excited, and by that I mean terrified, about exiling a graveyard with this card.
Yeah, fair.
It's just a lot of little things where 2 bodies for 3 mana, not super exciting, draw a card, whatever. But I can absolutely see this having a home in a black-green recurring nightmare survival deck as just a nice hit your graveyard or maybe draw you some cards. As well as I feel like I should mention that Vampires is getting more and more cards. I do think as a tribal deck, it can kill people, but it struggles with, why would you kill people like that? Because you don't have as much utility. And so any new cards that provide utility and flexibility for that tribe are welcome additions.
It's also a slam dunk in Alarian, for what it's worth.
Yeah.
Ooh.
I feel like I'm obligated to mention that.
Contractually obligated to mention it.
Not a druid, though.
That's why it doesn't go in Druid search.
Fair. I was I was trying to see how many niche, check boxes we could check off. We hit Allurin, we hit, Recurring Nightmare. I was wondering how far down. We hit Vampires.
You could play it in Food Chain, fine in that deck.
Welcome to cards printed in 2020 plus, right? It's just I guess all these weirdo archetypes that you thought of in the shower now have enough cards to at least X1 a weekly event or whatever.
My God, I can't believe it's another vampire warlock. What are the chances? That Venn diagram.
What are the odds that we're talking about warlock tribal in 2 years or whatever?
Oh, man. All right, let's move on. This is a card from the Commander Precons. I'd like to introduce Fane the Broker. This is a legendary human warlock. 3/3 for 2 and a black. Has a tap ability, sack a creature, put 2+1/+1 counters on target creature. Tap ability and remove a counter from a creature you control. Create a treasure token. Tap and sacrifice an artifact. Create a 2/1 Inkling flying token. And 3 and a black, untap Fane the Broker. There's a lot going on here, Jer. What do you think of this card?
I personally think the untap ability is a little too expensive. It's interesting. It does a bunch of cool things, but I think it doesn't quite do enough to justify it unless I'm missing a spot where you obviously want to put it in. But I just think it's a cool card, but there's just a little too much going on without enough of a payoff.
I feel like this is one of those cards that we should mention. Yes, it combos with insert broken combo engine card here.
Oh, were people going to say Paradox Engine? Is that what you're supposed to do?
It's just one of those Paradox Engine, Intruder Alarm. God, I don't know. There's probably other ones.
The cards that combo with the ham sandwich.
Yeah, exactly. 2 counters, target creature is kind of neat, though. I don't think this is worth playing for what it, but like 2 counters on a tap sacrifice ability. Like maybe there's a Necrotic Ooze pile with it.
Well, this is in a long line of like Staff of Domination, Trading Post, these like very, very, very strong cards. And you see all these tap abilities, like, it must be as good as those other ones.
Notably, those cards don't die to Lightning Bolt.
It combos with Rings of Bright Hearth?
Yeah. All right. Let's move on to another Commander Precon deck. This is Keen Duelist. 2 mana, 2/2 human wizard for 1 and a black. At the beginning of your upkeep, you and target opponent each reveal the top card of your library. You each lose life equal to the mana value of the card revealed by the other player. You each then put the card you revealed into your hand. Wheeler, what do you think?
So this card, I have a history of hating what I call bad bobs, because Dark Confidant is a Magic card that people always look at the spin-offs of it and go, this is good, right? Like, this has got to be good. This is just Bob number 3 or 2. Painseer being the famous one, which has gone up a little bit in my books, but still, and almost always they're just not worth it. But I will say, as somebody that has played a lot with Stormfist Crusader, the 2-drop knight from Eldraine that has Menace, it's red and black, and at the beginning of your upkeep, each player draws a card and loses 1 life. Like, giving them an extra card at the cost of that kind of life is pretty good. It's not bad. And yeah, that card has Menace. That's a pretty important part. But like, honestly, the 2 toughness and the fact that you are always getting the card is the most reliable part. Like, there's always a card being drawn, and this can attack into Llanowar Elves. So I'm willing to give it a shot in aggressive decks, like in a mono black or like a black X deck. But like, this is in the camp of like, check back in 3 months. I'm either going to say that it's totally fine and good, and in fact I might even like it, or I'm going to just laugh and be like, no, God, please don't. Here are all my bad beat stories surrounding this card.
I guess the real unknown variable here is trying to calculate the life loss. Is that something you even think about? You're like, nah, both players draw a card, it's a little bit of damage, but who cares?
Yeah.
Because there's also the chance you just get absolutely domed by your opponent's Tombstalker or Treasure Cruise,
I'm
right?
totally cool with that. Because like, if I like greatness at any cost, right? Like, they can reveal something that's large and that's okay. I'm still drawing a card. But also like the kind of cards that you would play alongside this, I think it's more likely that if you are playing this card, you are going to have the Tombstalker, Gurmag Angler, Hooting Mandrills.
But you're also running Bob if you're playing the first one.
Yeah.
You're probably not running Bob those cards if you're playing Dark Confidant.
Oh, I'm absolutely. Yeah.
I know.
Serge, let me hit you with this one. Death's Shadow. Eh?
All right.
There's 2 of them now.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
All right. I look back to circling back in 3 months.
This is great with the new Death Shadow because it domes both people.
Not to mention, like, yeah, losing that life can be a real issue, especially with red existing. But like, black, especially nowadays, has a bunch of low-cost life gain cards that don't gain you a massive amount. Like, we're not talking Thragtusk or whatever, but between the new Nighthawk that we have,
It's like, speak for yourself. That new Nighthawk has attacked for 5 several times.
yeah, that one's going to gain you a lot of life. But like, there are these little, trickling up kind of like life gain effects that keep you above dying levels, but not too much, right? So it allows you to race and subvert kind of like expectations in the clock. But yeah, I'm excited to jam this card.
Next up, we have Oreck Loremage. This is a 4 mana 3/3 human warlock for 2 black. I'm going to keep saying warlock like that just to really highlight how the growing numbers of that tribe. Anyways, Oreck has a tap ability. It says tap and search your library for a card. Put it into your graveyard and then shuffle. If it's an instant or sorcery, put a +1/+1 counter on Oreck. What do you think, Wheeler?
Well, it's a slam dunk in the aforementioned warlock tribal for sure. But looking at its applications elsewhere, I actually there's only one spot that I look at this card and I get really excited, and that's Necrotic Ooze. So Necrotic Ooze is a card that is always just like, yeah, we know it's broken. Like, there's a million ways that you can skin a cat with that card. Some of them are better than others. Some of them are more efficient and have, put up results with it. But they also require you to play like really bad cards and often require you to play at least 3 different really bad cards. And for those at home that don't know what the ooze is, it's a 4-mana creature, 2/2 black. It's a 4/3. Rarely attacks, but sometimes it might. It says as long as it's on the battlefield, it has all activated abilities of all creatures in all graveyards. And so Necrotic Ooze plus this card can just win the game. Like, it fuels everything. And I think it fits into a slot very similar to how like Pattern Rector, like the Sandra Bullock decks kind of function, in that you can combo kill in a variety of different paths, and all those paths like don't require you to play like 7-drop artifact creatures from alliances.
Poor Pentavis. Hey, Pentavis is doing its best.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, love me a good Pentavis. So yeah, it's like the fact that if you get an ooze in play with this card in the graveyard, you can just kill people by merit of building your deck in such a way that features activated abilities that will chain very well. Like, I mean, Devoted Druid is pretty common untapper that can just go infinite with this right away. Like, you dump a bunch of spells in the graveyard and you got 3 toughness, so you can do it several times and you can do it with them having removal. I'm not going to go into all the different things you can do, but it's just like a 2-part combo that just doesn't use complete waste of cards. Cool. If that makes sense.
I didn't even see that coming. That's a fascinating interaction.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty big upgrade, but also it's not a super. I mean, we've had some Victoria diehards for Necrotic Use, you know. A shout out to Handsome Mike. So yeah, it's like might not be on everybody's radar, because why would you?
It feels pretty niche, even in our niche format.
Until you die to it.
Yeah, and then you're like, oh god, this is surprisingly real. I've definitely been on the receiving end of a Necrotic Ooze deck popping off.
Elsewhere, you know, it's just Necrotic Ooze and Warlock Tribal, but that's it.
All right, next up we have our first double-face modal card of the day. On the front face, we have Pestilent Cauldron, which is a 3-mana artifact for 2 and a black. Tap, discard a card, create a 1/1 Pest token. 1 and tap, each opponent mills cards equal to the amount of life you gain this turn, and then 4 and tap, exile 4 cards from a single graveyard and draw a card. And on the opposite side, we have a 5-mana sorcery, Restorative Burst, for 3 green that reads, return up to 2 target creature, land, and or planeswalker cards from your graveyard to your hand. Each player gains 4 life and exile Restorative Burst. What do you think of this, Jer?
I think both halves are kind of interesting, but I just don't think either half is enticing enough to make me want to play this. Like, I think the back half is the more powerful side. Getting sort of 2 regrowths for 1 card and some life gain is going to be pretty nice for some decks. And if you're the late game deck, giving your opponent 4 life as well isn't going to be that big of a deal. But because it doesn't get back instants and sorceries, it sort of limits its applications. Then the front half is the more interesting side, but I just don't think it does quite enough to merit the inclusion. If you could draw cards for a little cheaper, sort of tying in graveyard hate to card draw is definitely something that's appealing for the format. But the fact that it costs 4 mana.
After paying 3, 7 mana to draw your first card, and it's conditional.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think this will end up seeing much, if any, play in the format.
Next up, we have Plumb the Forbidden, is a 2-mana instant for 1 and a black. As an additional cost to cast the spell, you may sacrifice 1 or more creatures. When you do, copy the spell for each creature sacrificed this way, and it reads, draw a card and lose a life. What do you think, Wheeler?
This is an interesting templating, and it's on a couple of cards, which really play well into Magecraft, one of the mechanics of the set. But like, aside from that, just having the multiple copies, like the copies are, it's a triggered ability on you meeting this additional cost, right? Like, it's as you cast this, you may do it. When you do, there's a triggered ability to copy this. So you have a bunch of instances of Plumb the Forbidden, which means that it's a little bit better against, I guess, counter magic, and especially, I guess, multiple instances of drawing cards, losing life. Or like, I like this card a lot, and there are some really good Magic players that have said that this card is potentially one of the best cards in Strixhaven. Mind you, that's through the scope of other constructed formats, but taking what they have said and then applying it to our format, where we have pre-existing archetypes that like these kind of spells, I'm inclined to say that it'll probably show up.
Real quick, where does this have a home? My brain goes to Aristocrats.
I need you to ask me the question, Serge.
Does it go to Aristocrats?
I think think this is playable in Aristocrats.
And everyone goes wild. Everyone cheers and everybody's clapping.
Oh my god. It's also just like lets you sack your board attached to a spell.
At instant speed in response to wrath or something? Holy moly.
Spellseeker doesn't need help to be a completely broken in half magic card. Thank you for printing that card. It's great. Really has contributed to my enjoyment of the format. But like the fact that this is just such an easy card to also just drum up and lets you sack your entire board through a spell, which we don't really have, right? Like I guess wraths can do it.
You're not sacking your board if you wrath though, but fair enough.
Yeah, but it's an uncounterable, I'm going to sack my entire board. There's nothing you can do about it.
Right, because it's part of the cost. Jerry, you were trying to get in at a point there. Did you have anything to add?
I was just gonna say this does in fact go in Aristocrats, and I think it's probably quite good in that.
Oh, thank you.
Do you think aggressive decks play this as a way to refill and get around removal? Or like, other than Aristocrats, who's playing this?
You might play it in mono black because a bunch of your creatures get outclassed early. But
yeah, cashing in Bloodghast and stuff is kind of enticing, but that also might just be a byproduct of we're talking about a spell that could allow us to draw a whole bunch of cards, which is right up the alley of the two people you're asking. And those decks, I think those decks are like, Village Rites is an absolute slam dunk, but I don't know if they want Village Rites light, you know?
Well, and the 1 mana is big because that deck is often operating on low resources. So like,
yeah, super low mana costs, very pip dense kind of deck.
Keeping up 1 mana is relatively doable. 2 mana, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's move on to... Is this the first Planeswalker we've talked about this set? Oh, no. We talked on the previous episode. We got to your favorite twins. Anyways, we're talking about Professor Onyx. 6 mana, new Liliana here. So for 4 black, you have a Liliana Planeswalker that enters with 5 loyalty, has a static ability, Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, each opponent loses 2 life, and you gain 2 life. +1 ability, lose 1 life. Look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 into your hand and the rest into the graveyard. -3 ability, each opponent sacrifices a creature with the greatest power among creatures that player controls. And then -8, each opponent may discard a card if they don't lose 3 life. Repeat this process 6 more times. JR, what do you think?
I think this card is pretty good. My mind immediately just like wants to play it as like an onboard Stormwind condition. It's like it's tendrils on a Planeswalker. The +1 is very good. I guess black gets strategic planning now. The -3 having the condition of killing what is likely the creature that's going to kill you the fastest is good. The -8 probably wins the game. It is pretty expensive. I don't know. My gut says this is pretty playable either in like a bigger mid-rangey board control deck, and I will try it in some sort of combo shell to try to have it as like a value engine that can also just murder your opponent with the static ability.
I foresee losing to Nelson with this card.
Nelson specifically, really?
Well, it's just in that category of like, I mean, it's a 6 mana mythic of a Planeswalker people know and love. So if it hits the board in a deck that wants to include it, you're probably dying, right? If it sticks around. Like the big black storm decks, God bless them. And they'll probably want to play this card.
Yeah, like I immediately thought of Tin Fins. I'm like,
yeah,
I could kill people with Tin Fins.
Obligatory Chain of Smog kill, like it goes infinite with Chain of Smog.
Can you really quickly go through that interaction?
You bet I can. So Chain of Smog is a 2 mana sorcery from Onslaught. It's 1 in a black. A target player discards 2 cards from their hand. That player may copy the spell and may choose new targets. So it's one of those like poxy cards where you're like, oh, haha, everybody just goes hellbent if you cast this and target your opponent, but you don't. You just target yourself.
And notably, you don't actually need to have cards to discard to do that.
Right. Yeah. That's the big thing is that in order to keep the chain going, you don't have to do anything.
There's no condition to copy. You just can copy. You're like, sure.
Yeah. You just ask for another please and thank you.
Don't mind if I do.
And I think that like because you can also just find this off Shred Memory, like Chain of Smog being a 2 mana spell, you can find it off of Shred Memory, Muddle the Mixture, and Dimir Infiltrator, the transmute spells, that it kind of pushes it to be like, okay, maybe like a blue-black deck could also play this, or like even just find it off Shred Memory in a deck that normally finds your Demonic Tutor. So I think it's got enough going for it that it'll see play and will probably kill some people.
I have a question. Do we have a fair Professor? Like, do you like Professor in a blue-black control deck and just draining people off of cantrips and counterspells, or is this too cute?
I don't think you play it in a deck that plays a lot of counterspells. Like you don't want to play this in a deck where you're mostly operating at instant speed, but you could definitely play it in a deck like the Rock that
Yeah.
is going to have a bunch of mana. It is just like a good value card. Like the +1 is going to get you ahead on cards. It's good card selection. It fills up the graveyard. The -3 is good at dealing with problematic creatures your opponent might play, and you're going to work up to the ultimate, which is going to win you the game.
It's also going to like make your rampant growth, like your turn 7 rampant growth or nature's lore.
Oh,
relevant.
yeah.
So there's some added juice to it.
It's neat. As a 6-mana planeswalker, you sometimes worry that it's just too expensive, and it's neat that this one has so many homes, that it's powerful enough to justify that cost.
Yeah, I really like this design. I think adding static abilities to planeswalkers really opens up the design space for them and making them more sort of specific in their use cases as opposed to just like ubiquitously powerful.
As long as we're not talking Teferi 3 or Narset.
Sure. I mean I think the design spaces.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not saying all the use cases of that design space is good.
But nothing but positives for the past 3 years.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to add, or shall we move on?
Her outfit looks great.
Oh, yeah. That chair? Excellent. All right.
That chair.
That's a good chair.
I know, I'm not disagreeing. It's a great chair.
Just the order was great. It was like Ben's like, oh yeah, her outfit is great, and Serge is like, yeah, that's a nice chair.
Yeah. That's a nice chair.
I'm pretty sure our friend Olivia is stoked to get those shoulders in cosplay too.
Yeah.
All right. Let's move on to Sedgemoor Witch. Is a 3-mana 3/2 human warlock for 2 and a black. Has menace. Also has ward. So if you want to target the spell, pay 3 life, or the spell is countered. And a mage craft ability. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, create a 1/1 pest token. Wheeler, what do you think?
Not to potentially spoil a future question, but this is without a doubt my favorite card of the whole set, and I'm absolutely in love with it. I think I've called it the perfect magic card, where it's just everything about it is so good and fair. Like reading through it, it's powerful, but it doesn't feel oppressive. It's thematic, but it's also strong enough to go into a variety of things, right? So like its mana cost is, 3 mana is still 3 mana, but it's easy to cast because it's single pipped. Menace is a hell of an ability to attack. With 3 power, that's reasonable, but with 2 toughness means that, if it is double blocked, chances are even if you remove one of the blockers, it's still dying. Ward makes it unappealing to try and kill off, but also not impossible because you're just using life and not, restricting mana. The Magecraft ability, you only ever really, like, if you make 1 token off this, that's still reasonable. But so if you're playing it in a deck that isn't super spell based, you could still get value out of it. Like you could play this in a mono black aggro deck and you'd be fine. Play it, fatal push 1 thing, great, move on. But if you build around it and play it in a deck with like Young Pyromancer or Monastery Mentor, just like as a Mardu Pyromancer deck, and the art is fantastic and the name is fantastic, and this is the perfect magic card. I'm just in love with everything. I would like to give a bottle of wine or like really fine sparkling water or whatever to whomever led the design on this card. It is, I love it.
And just home-wise, this goes where?
Oh, I'm going to play this in any deck with spells and black cards. Yeah. Like,
all right.
In Storm it goes.
Well,
I mean, all of a sudden, your Open the Warrens is a lot easier to cast. Empty the Warrens, pardon me.
Yeah. But they open the Warrens.
You make a bunch of, let's not waste time on the stupid scenario I was about to win.
This card is cool as heck.
Yeah, love it to bits. Favorite
awesome.
card.
I applaud your restraint, Wheeler. All right. Next up, we have Umbral Juke. Is a 3-mana instant for 2 and a black. Choose 1. Target player sacks a creature or planeswalker, your favorite line of text, Jer, or you can create a 2/1 white and black flying inkling token. Jer, what do you think?
I do love the or planeswalker text, but that's only part of the line, and sacrifice is a lot worse than destroy. This is a cool card, although edicts traditionally aren't super great in our format. So I think the default mode with this is a 2/1 flash flyer, which isn't great. I just don't think this card's quite powerful enough to see play on average. Like it's a decent utility card, and it'll have its use cases come up. And like, if you think it's sweet, you should definitely play it. But I think if you're in it, it doesn't quite make the cut in most decks.
All right, let's move on to another double-face modal card. On the front face, we have Valentin, Dean of the Vein. Is a 1/1 for 1 legendary vampire warlock for a single black pip, has menace and lifelink, and an ability that reads, if a non-token creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. When you do, you may pay 2 generic. If you do, create a Pest token. And on the other side, we have Lisette, Dean of the Root, is a 4-mana 4/4 for 2 green legendary human druid. Man, all these creature types. And reads, whenever you gain life, you may pay 1. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, and those creatures gain trample until end of turn. Wheeler.
Yeah, big shout out to whoever said, hey, Kalidas, Trader of Get is a cool effect. What if instead we put it on a 1-mana creature? Thank you for all of that. Safi sends her regards.
So you're saying this is also the coolest card in the set?
Yeah. Look, people are getting too much value out of their graveyard. You gotta do something to fight the Uros.
No, leave my graveyard alone. Like, even okay, tell you what. Well, I'll meet you in the middle. Mess up my Yawgmoth's will, but stay away from my Safi Eric's daughter. Okay, like, I'm doing fair things. And speaking of fair things, I think this card is also just fine if it's doing fair things. Being a 1-drop that is evasive and lifelink is kind of spicy. Like, even just throwing a Rancor on this is kind of a nightmare if it's not dealt with. Also, the ability is quite good, right? Like, just from exiling all creatures on the opponent's end that are dying, you shut down a lot of different things, both in a hate bear capacity and in a like nice Earthshaker Kenra. Be a shame if you never saw it ever again. And then also just gives you a mana sink. So if you are drawing, like, again, if you're playing this in like mono black or black green, if you're drawing more reactionary or situational cards, you can also just start pumping generic mana into this card to build a board. So it offers you an outlet to build up your board without applying additional resources, which really pushes into the themes of those decks of like, what are you going to kill my Bloodghast? Okay, right? Like the like nice removal idiot. Be a shame if I just got more things without doing anything, which is cool. And then the flip side is like, I could foresee this card, like, I don't think you ever play this with Lisette being the like main thing, you know, but like if it I guess you could tutor for it off Recruiter of the Guard. That's not the worst.
It also triggers off each instance of lifelink.
Yeah, that's pretty nice. Like, maybe this falls into that weird camp of like, if I'm playing like a green white, or for Abzan, it's obviously an easier discussion point because you can cast Valentin and Lisette. But if I'm playing like a green white life gain ish combo deck, you know, Archangel Athun, Spike Feeder,
yeah,
the Shenlo special. If I'm playing that deck, like tutoring, finding this card lines up, finding the Lisette side also just interacts really well with some of the other tutors that you are going to play, like Recruiter of the Guard. So yeah, maybe Lisette does have a home.
And also just being able to Recruiter for a big chonker is kind of nice.
Yeah, like a 4/4 is no joke, right?
Yeah.
Like it's large. That'll kill people. And giving trample is kind of messed up. Each creature you control. Oh my god. Okay, yeah, maybe this card's good.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just better than I thought.
I'm actually kind of stoked for that card. I want to go back to some of my like life gain sub-theme mid-range decks.
God, I thought it was put a counter on one creature.
No. Your entire board gets a counter forever, and they also get trampled till end of turn.
I've changed my tune. I think Lisette. Actually, it's my favorite card of the set.
Yeah, this might be really, really good in just Abzan mid-range, right?
Yeah, like the flip side again, like if you can cast both sides, I think it's a done deal no matter what. If you can cast just the front half, the warlock guy, I forget his name already because I'm not
Valentin.
Valentin. If you can cast just that, that's also fine. Like, that's got enough going for it. But now I'm solidly convinced that if you can just cast Lisette in the right deck, that's also just an absolute stomp.
Yeah, you just have so much incidental life gain in Abzan as well.
It's just another one of those cards where like if you untap, there's a reasonable chance your opponent's just never recovering.
Yeah, you're gonna die.
I'm never gonna be able to financially recover from this. Yeah.
Oh my god, it does go infinite with Devoted Druid Spike Feeder, actually. Huh. Cool.
All right. Let's move on to our last black card of the day, the Vainwich Coven. This is a 3-mana vampire warlock for 2 and a black, has menace, and the ability whenever you gain life, you may pay black. If you do, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. And this is another card from the Commander Precons. What do you think, Wheeler?
So in Jumpstart, there was a card called Witch of the Moors. It's like a 5-mana 4/4 Death Toucher. And at your end step, if you gain life this turn, each opponent sacks a creature and you return a creature. And I love that card to bits because for whatever reason, the pandemic has turned me into someone that is just obsessed with Soul Sisters and just gaining life and having something relate to that. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone that has played Magic for a long, for more than 5 years or 10 years that doesn't like Raised Deads. Like Raised Deads and Regrowths just feel so good. It's just a lot of value. And so like any instance of you gaining life for just a single mana, you just get to Raise Dead, which is kind of ridiculous, That said, you're paying 3 mana for just a 3/3, which has menace.
Yeah, it does have menace. It's not just a vanilla dork.
I'll get it out of the way and say that, again, this is a 3-drop for the vampire deck that is easier to cast if you're multiple colors, has a reasonable keyword, and that deck tends to gain a bunch of life, so it provides some utility, which helps separate, that kind of deck from just creature plus removal. And so I'm excited to play this card. I don't know how good ultimately it'll be, but like the floor is still just kind of this annoying attacker against planeswalkers. It's easy to cast.
Cool. Let's move on to green cards, and we're going to start off with the Accomplished Alchemist. This is a 4-mana 2/5 elf druid for 3 and a green. Has a tap ability, add 1 mana of any color. Has a second tap ability, add X mana of any one color, where X is the amount of life you gained this turn. Start us off, Wheeler.
So this card, I'd like to flip the tables for just a second. Where do you think I'm going to play this?
Druids or Hoof?
Sorry, not laughing at the suggestions, just laughing at druids.
I mean, I know. All right, we'll have your evaluation, and we'll throw it over to Jared to see if it has a home in Druids. Soul Sisters, realistically, because you want to gain a bajillion life and then make a bajillion mana.
Jared, any guess?
Is it a Bolas's Citadel card?
I'd like to target this card with Shallow Grave in a deck, ideally with Bolas's Citadel. Like, adding X mana for how much life you've gained is kind of absurd. Like, especially if you're playing it in a deck that might use some kind of Children of Corliss engine, that might have a Zurin Orb, that might have, God forbid you attack with a Gristlebrand. I mean, you're probably winning already because you have a Gristlebrand and you got to attack. But like, yeah, I want to be clear. I'm not saying this card is channel. I want to get out ahead because I'm going to say that this operates on a somewhat similar-ish axis as channel, in that like you are getting channel is obviously infinitely more busted, but like by taking an action that your deck can already accomplish and is already accomplishing, if we're doing Tinfin stuff or again Zurin Orb shenanigans, then gaining a bunch of life and converting that life effectively into mana seems kind of messed up. Like, I want to play this and give it haste and kill people with Tendrils of Agony, which in turn might have some fun interactions with doing a short drills, which gives you like the ability to tap for like 10 mana or whatever and then go off even more. But also just like having 5 toughness, it's a 4-drop. That's real, it's worth mentioning.
But if you're cheating into play, who cares, right? Yeah.
Like you have to kill it proper to get rid of it. So
yeah, it's definitely out of bolt range, right?
Yeah, I'm going to try to do absolutely disgusting, heinous things with this card.
Yeah, I imagined you playing this card with Weather the Storm.
Yeah, exactly. That's another huge Weather the Storm, Aetherflux Reservoir. Like, yeah, it's going to be gross.
Real quick over to Jer. It's a druid.
Too expensive.
That's fair.
4 mana, only taps for 1 in that deck. We can do better.
So it's worth mentioning, I guess, WotC heard your complaints from the previous set of there not being enough druids, because so many of these green cards are druids. And I'm going to be leaning on that subtype, kind of like I did on Warlock previously when we go through the next couple cards here. Speaking of which, we have a double-faced modal card over here. The Augmenter Pugilist is a 3-mana 3/3 troll druid with trample, and says as long as you control 8 or more lands, it gets +5/+5. And on the other side, we have a 5-mana sorcery called Echoing Equation for 3 blue. Choose target creature you control. Each other creature you control becomes a copy of it until end of turn, except those creatures aren't legendary if the chosen creature is is legendary. What do you think, Jer?
This card's kind of interesting, although I think the 8 lands theme isn't really that applicable in Highlander. Like, the only deck that's trying to get to 8 lands is Scapeshift, and they're not really in the market for an 8/8 at that point. They're only in the market for Scapeshift. Yeah, so I just don't think there's a really great shell. Like, the back half is definitely like sort of the flavor text of the card. Like, you're not playing it for that. It might come up on occasion where you get to like make a bunch of Primeval Titans or something and win the game that way. But I don't think you're gonna play the card for that. There's just like better ways to do that.
You're playing this card. I think there was a typo on the one Serge saw, because you're playing this card in Big Hand Tribal.
That's a muscle wizard. It's not a troll druid.
Look at the size of its hand.
One arm. So somebody only like skips every day except for right arm day.
Mm-hmm. Big fist.
All right, let's talk about Blex Vexing Pest here. This is a 3-mana 3/2 legendary pest for 2 and a green. Other pest, bats, insects, snakes, and spiders you control get +1/+1. And when it dies, gain 4 life. This is also a double face modal card, though. On the opposite side, 4-mana sorcery, search for Blex, 2 black. Look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may put any number of them into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. Lose 3 life for each card you put into your hand this way. What do you think, Jer?
I think this card is quite good, actually. I think the front half is reasonable to play as like a creature that might occasionally pump one of your other creatures, but otherwise it's just a 3-mana 3/2 that gains you 4 life. There's lots of analogs to that, and they're all playable. It's not quite as reliable because it does it on dies as opposed to ETB, but still going to get it most of the time when it's relevant. But the back half of this card, I think, is the more interesting half, and might go into some sort of shell that Ben was talking about earlier with the accomplished Alchemist. Like, I want to play this card alongside Weather the Storm and play it as a draw 5. I don't know if that's good enough, but probably not, actually. 15 life is a lot.
I mean, sometimes those decks have played like Infernal Contract and like the Cruel Bargain or whatever, the triple black.
Better though, I think, because they're less mana and less life.
They're very pip dense though. I think that's the life is whatever. I think it's the trips black versus...
Yeah, Infernal Contract is black sorcery. Draw 4 cards, lose half your life round down.
Yeah, and you get 2 of them. There's another one from like Portal. But I think the fact that it kind of replicates those cards, but then you also have that front side that is relevant. Like, it just stops you from dying sometimes.
Yeah, it could be worthwhile in a deck like that where you're playing it for the back half, but like in the given matchup, you can just play it as like a roadblock that gains you, like keeps you pretty healthy, or can pressure a Planeswalker or something. Yeah, I think this card will see some play, but it's not going to be a staple or anything.
Next up, we have an instant called Charge Through. Single green, target creature gains trample until end of turn, and draw a card. Wheeler.
Big fan of this card because there's not a lot of ways to give trample at 1 mana or 2 mana. And the ways that there are don't draw you cards, or they are attached to auras, which don't work super well in blitz style decks. And so the fact that we now have an instant that draws you a card and gives something trample, which can then be copied or flashed back or contributes to any number of, Kiln Fiend / Quirion, well, not Quirion Dryad, but Deeproot Champion, Deeproot Elite, one of the 2 style of effects is welcome. It's just like a nice little, finally, glad of it. Like, it works with the next card that we're talking about, I guess is what I was about to say, which sets up a good segue.
Is Infect happy with this too?
Yeah, you could play it in Infect. The trample's nice, and obviously the draw, but like usually
I think you'd play it in Infect.
Yeah, I think you play it, but it's in that camp of like, don't be surprised if you replace it in like 3 months, or if your build shifts. Yeah.
Anyways, you set up a wonderful segue to Dragon's Guard Elite. 2 mana, 2/2 human druid for 1 and a green. Has a Magecraft ability. So whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery, put a +1/+1 counter on the Elite. Yeah, sure would love to combos with Charge Through. An activated ability, 4 green, double the number of +1/+1 counters on Dragon's Guard Elite. Wheeler, what do you think?
See, I will probably activate that second ability like once or twice every year, but like, that's okay. They didn't even need to put that ability on there. I'm totally fine with the first one. Please continue to print more Quirion Dryad, Sprite Dragon, like Deeproot, whatever variants. Just keep them coming. And if you know what, if it's not pushing it, keep making them 2/2s, because like the fact that this is just a bear is great, because it can attack into dorks and tokens and whatnot. want. And if you want to play spells to pump it, great, you can. But if you just want to attack and then develop like a True Name Nemesis or keep up like a Vendilion Click or whatever, that's okay too.
Back in my day, you got a 1/1 for 3 if you wanted it to grow.
Yeah, you got a 1/1. And if you try to cast green spells, oh, no, you're not getting that there. No, it had to be a different color.
All right. Next up, Ecological Appreciation is a sorcery spell for X, 2, and a green, and reads, search your library and graveyard for up to 4 creature cards with different names that each have mana value X or less and reveal them. An opponent chooses 2 of those cards. Shuffle the chosen cards into your library, and the rest go on to the battlefield. Exile Ecological Appreciation. What do you think, Jer?
I've been conditioned to think these cards aren't very good, but this one is kind of interesting. It like almost does enough to make me want to try it out. I'm trying to think of combo applications, and I can't think of a good way for a reasonable amount of mana to win the game just with this card. It's pretty easy to set up a win for the next turn in a bunch of different decks.
X or less definitely sets up more combos than something like Uncage the Menagerie.
Yeah, that card's not very good, and this card's very close. I think I'm not sure it's quite there. Like the fact that your opponent chooses them is obviously a downer.
Feels like if you put 6 mana into this, you're winning the game, but that's still 6 mana, right?
Yeah, and I was just trying to think. I'm like, I don't think it's that easy to win the game on the spot. Like you're likely winning the game the next turn, I think. Yeah. But I was trying to think of good ways to win the game on the spot, and I couldn't come up with many. I also think it might just be reasonable in like a green-white mid-range deck. Like
I was gonna say, is there a fair version of this card?
I think the amount of times you're gonna be able to like hose your opponent with this card in like a green-white deck is pretty high. I'm not sure that's really worth it, because like you could just play like Primeval Titan or something, but maybe being able to cast this on 5 and get like Scavenging Ooze and something else.
Like Scavenging Ooze, Thalia, Stoneforge Mystic, something else.
Yeah, like good enough. Like the classic use your green X spell tutor to get Gadok Tegan play.
Finally, they made Collected Company playable in Canlander.
I've won multiple tournaments with that card in my deck, I'll have you know.
Okay. You've also won tournaments with, God, I'm trying to think of really bad 5-drops that...
Lichia Legion Tribune.
I didn't want to slam that card because I have a soft spot for that card in particular, but that was the deck that I had in mind.
That deck is amazing. I still can't believe I've won a tournament with that card, but you know, those were the days.
So next up, we have Emergent Sequence. It's a 2-mana sorcery for 1 and a green. Search your library for a basic land card. Put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. That land becomes a 0/0 green-blue fractal creature that's still a land, and put a +1/+1 counter on it for each land you had enter the battlefield under your control this turn. What do you think, Jer?
This card is really hard to evaluate because in most cases, the ramp decks that are playing like their rampant growths are playing those, so their ramp spells don't die to removal spells. They're like actively trying to avoid getting their early ramp spells being vulnerable. And this obviously doesn't do a good job of that, but it can make like a turn where you go like 4 mana, like Sky Shroud Claim into this, make a 4/4. Pretty insane.
Like even just fetch land, turn 2 fetch land into this is a 3/3. That also ramps you, but you also have a 3/3.
There's definitely situations where it's like not super hard to make this card pretty effective, but like that 3/3 still dies to Lightning Bolt.
Yeah.
And like there's not that many decks playing all the rampant growths. And I don't think like there are lots of decks that are just playing like Nature's Lore and 3 visits.
How bad do we want another like 2-mana 3/3? That isn't always a 2-mana 3/3. That's a 1/1 if you draw it late game.
Well, yeah, no decks want that.
Yeah.
But I'm basically trying to think if this card goes on Scape Shift, and I don't think it does. I can't think if there's another deck that really actively wants this. Like maybe does it go into Jeskai Ascendancy? Probably not, right?
Oh, well, I mean that it adds blue. It probably does, but
no.
That's usually not a good gauge of playability.
All right. Let's move on to Fortifying Draught. This is a single green instant, gain 2 life, and then target creature gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the amount of life gained this turn.
I foresee killing people with this card. Like I I genuinely believe that this is something that if you're pairing it in a deck with, I think people might default to thinking like a Johnny's Pride Mate, or, like, I guess we haven't talked about multicolor, but other cards in the set that will pop up, then yeah, you can probably kill someone dead with this. It's good if you're able to copy it for what it's worth. So maybe it might find a home in certain blitz strategies too.
Oh God, right. Yeah, the second one gets way bigger.
Yeah, but like also just with Scavenging Ooze, this card's fine. Like that can get kind of gross.
Or even in just like a Naya deck, you like Lightning Helix something, and then you're like, oh, my unblocked creature gets +5/+5.
Yeah, like paying 1 mana to +2/+2 and gain 2 life is not terrible, but I don't think you'd ever really just play that. But the fact that modifying how much the creature gets pumped modifying that number is like relatively easy, and especially done so by the decks that typically want pump spells or could play a card like this, means that, yeah, I think people are going to die to this card. Yeah, big fan.
Cool. Well, on the life gain subject, on the subject of life gain, there we go. There's the segue. We have the Honor Troll, great name, which is a 3-mana 2/3 troll druid for 2 and a green, has vigilance, and if you would gain life, you gain that much life +1 instead. And then Honor Troll gets +2/+1 as long as you have 25 or more life. What do you think of this one, Wheeler?
There's an angel that does something similar to this. Angel of... I was going to say Finality. That's not it.
It's like the 2/4, right?
Yeah, Vitality, I think is what it's called. Angel of Vitality. It's like a 3-mana. Whenever you gain life, you gain...
Oh, this is a 3-mana 2/2 flyer. You're correct.
Yeah. If you gain life, you gain that +1. And if you have 2/2, it gets +2/+2 if you have 25 or more life. And so it's basically that, but with flying, and, get +2/+2 instead of +2/+1. But again, decks like that, redundancy, right? Like if you're going to play the I'm going to gain life and kill you deck, a Johnny's Pride Mate, Heliod, a card that we'll see later, like that kind of thing. You just want redundancy, and this provides that at a mana cost that it's not, 3 mana is 3 mana is 3 mana, but you're likely a deck that also has Moxen and Mana Dorks, and getting this down earlier due to the acceleration is great. Plus, vigilance on a big body is always scary, right?
Yep. Makes combat, racing, and math very, very difficult for your opponent.
Like, Questing Beast is a messed up card for a bunch of different reasons, but the fact that it has vigilance and like 4 power, I mean, it has Death Touch, but 4 power and 4 toughness, like that's a huge part of why. I mean, that card's just all messed up. We don't have to talk about that, but like, yeah, like vigilance on a big body is scary. So yeah, I think it'll see play in the decks that are already playing to that theme.
All right. Next up, Kian, the Dean of Substance, is a 3-mana 2/2 legendary elf druid for 2 and a green. Tap ability, exile the top card of your library. If it's a land, put it into your hand. Otherwise, put a study counter on it. Does it say anywhere what a study counter does?
I believe on the back side of it.
Hold on, the next ability.
Oh, sorry.
5 mana, 4 and a green. Create a 0/0 green and blue fractal creature token. Put a +1/+1 counter on it for each different mana value among non-land cards you own in exile with study counters on them. Ah, okay. And then on the other side, we have Inbraham, Dean of Theory. This is a 4-mana 3/3 legendary owl, bird wizard for 2 blue, has flying, and X blue and tap, exile the top X cards of your library and put a study counter on each of them. Then you may put a card you own in exile with a study counter on it into your hand. There's so many words. Jer, what do you think?
I think these cards are just a little too dirtily. Like, this is one of those cards that I wish had vigilance, because like the abilities are cool. If you got to attack on an empty board with these and use the abilities, they might see play. But I think because they're essentially enchantments, they're like, you're not really entering combat with either of these very often. Like maybe the backside, but a 4-mana 3/3 flyer without flash isn't very enticing, and their abilities just like aren't. They're very slow, so it's just doesn't line up well with the speed of the format, I don't think.
I was almost thinking that maybe the front half Kian as a mana sink for when you go infinite with druids might be kind of cute, but the fact that you only get to put a +1/+1 counter if you already have a card in exile from the first ability is a big hoop to jump through there.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you already need to have her in play, or you need to have one of the haste haste things plus an untapper. Like, yeah, I think there's just a few too many hoops.
All right, last green card we're going to talk about today is the Sprout. The Sprout Back Trudge is a 9-mana 9/7 fungus beast for 7 green, but this spell costs X less to cast, where X is the amount of life you gain this turn, has trample, and at the beginning of your end step, if you gained life this turn, you may cast the Trudge from your graveyard. Ooh, this is another card from the Commander Precon. What do you think, Wheeler?
I really like the ooh that you had there. Oh.
The value. Things from your graveyard.
Yeah, I do like stuff in the graveyard. It's extremely large. Like I've been betrayed by Ghoul Tree one too many times. And so like I look at it, I see that you're going to be you say you're going to be cheaper. You say you're going to come back like you're going to tell me I can cast you from the graveyard. But like I get it, Silver Smote Ghoul exists and like but like I'm not going to I can't do it, Serge. I can't tell you that there's a life gain dredge deck. We already have Elf
But
Dredge.
you don't need both, right? It's not like the Ghoul Tree where you can only cast it from the graveyard.
Yeah, that's true.
You can just be a life gain deck, and then if it happens to end up in the graveyard, you can just cast it later.
But I guess that's what I'm getting at as well, is that like if you're not both of those and we're just talking about like, hey, gain some life, make me cheaper, like yeah, maybe this is fine if I just, it sounds weird because the decks that can gain life, the numbers that you present sound preposterous, right? Where it's like, yeah, I guess if I gain 5 life or 4 life.
That's doable. Yeah. I mean, I'd play a 4-mana 9/7 with trample any day.
Yeah. So like maybe this is fine. It's just the top end for those decks, like you don't need extra things, right? Like you have your Archangel of Thunes, you have your mana sinks from equipment or whatever. Like Siege Rhino exists. And so I'm trying to think of a world where I would want to play that over some of the pre-existing cards. And like maybe that does exist. Maybe that's there. Maybe I'm being too hard on it. Maybe the crimes of Ghoul Tree shouldn't apply to Sprout Back Trudge. But I'll be cautiously optimistic involving this card.
Right on.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about lands. Now,
Okay.
Is it appropriate to call this the Snarl Cycle?
Yes.
I think it would be inappropriate to call it anything else.
All right, let me introduce the Snarl Cycle of lands. And we'll talk about Fury Clam. Fury Calm.
Fury Clam.
Oh, no.
Love
All right, Fury Calm Snarl enters the battlefield. You may reveal a mountain or plains from your hand. If you don't, it enters tapped. It taps for a red or a white in this particular case. Now, notably, there are no like basic land types, so these are not fetchable. But new duels.
Well, they're completing a cycle.
Yeah, this is the completion of the cycle for the parents that didn't have it before.
These are like Return to Zendikar, the lands, right?
No, they're the Shadows over Innistrad.
Oh, right.
The Port Town cycle. I have to admit, I have played Choked Estuary before, and it was not bad. The way that I look at these cards is, am I a deck that wants the decision between Counterspell or Hymn to Torak on turn 2? And am I only a 2-color deck? If that's the case, then maybe.
These likely really help out Mardu, actually.
Yeah, there are certain colors that it helps more than others. So.
Yeah, I guess Mardu's a good example for that then, because it's just like, well, I have this Hymn to Torak, but I also might need to Lightning Helix.
And cast Brimaz and cast a bunch of Chandras.
Oh, God, is it? But God, I love Mardu.
All the cards are sweet. You can just never cast them.
Mardu is caught up. I'm convinced that Mardu is actually good and powerful. I know it's all Canadian Highlander. I don't know what to call him. You should know him. You should know who this guy is. Robin Sorensen has not shut up about Mardu Monarchy.
Mardu now, really?
Oh, it just my messenger is clogged by so I've been playing Mardu Monarchy. It's like, okay, dude. So yeah, maybe like honestly, the enemy cycle for this is probably more relevant, right? Like again, if you're not like, is there a world where you play the Jeskai ones?
I think the Jeskai mana is good enough because most of the time you're pretty blue heavy, so you're happy to play a bunch of basic islands.
And the single red pip isn't like, there's not a lot of double red early.
Exactly.
Right?
Like usually the only double red spell if you play it is Chandra Torch of Defiance or maybe some of the dragons.
If they print a couple of really good double red cards, I could foresee myself playing the blue-red Snarl in like a year. Like I think these lands are always important to like remember that they exist.
Yeah.
And that
totally.
try them out. Don't just say like, oh, well, somebody said they were bad at my LGS.
And you write them off forever, which is a terrible idea. Exactly.
Yeah, don't listen to Magic players. They're idiots. Us included. Hey, wait a minute. Yeah.
You tell them, boss. Yeah.
The blue-black one, or sorry, the black-white one could maybe see play too.
Well, red-white, I agree. White-black, like there's some colors that traditionally don't have as much access to fixing and are more color pip heavy in the early game.
I could see playing the green-black one for sure as well.
Yeah. Him to Torak plus X. That's the test I always
Or
put it to.
sinkhole.
Oh,
Yeah.
God.
All right, let's move on to the Hall of Oracles. This is a land that taps to add a colorless, but for 1 and a tap, you can filter into a mana of any color, and tap ability, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Activate only as a sorcery, and only if you've cast an instant or sorcery this turn. Is this good enough? It's pretty slow. That's cool.
Okay, I hate saying this because it doesn't mean anything. I really want it to become a card people will play because it does a good thing, right? Like even if you just played this as I think if you got rid of the mana filtration ability, people would look at this as if it were a better card. As weird as that sounds.
I think you're right. People see that ability and just immediately think the card sucks.
They're like, why is this a rare? This should be an uncommon.
Yeah, like sometimes you have to do that. Like just ignore that. Pretend that line's not on the card. That's the gravy. Like, am I just playing a colorless land that I can then tap to give all my spells like the additional ability to pump up a creature at sorcery speed, mind you? That's pretty huge.
That is very big.
Yeah.
They're like, sorry, infect. We saw what you're trying to do.
I actually think Infect's one of the better places for this card.
Yeah, in fact, you're like the vulnerability of that deck, the emotional vulnerability of that deck, where you're just all your cards are on the table, quite literally.
Yeah.
You're just like, hey, so I'm about to cast this Might of Old Krosa,
I'm going to kill you.
and I have no way of protecting my creature outside of another giant growth, right? Like,
you're not wrong.
yeah, I like this card, but it's also a card that is up my alley.
That's fair. All right. And the final card that's going to take us home in our episode today is the Biblioplex. Is a land that taps for colorless and has another ability to untap. Look at the top card of your library. If it's an instant or sorcery, reveal it and put it into your hand. If you don't put the card into your hand, you may put it into your graveyard. Activate this ability only if you have 0 or 7 cards in hand. I love the subtle nod to Library of Alexandria here. What do you think, Jer?
I think this one just has a couple too many hoops to go over. Like the cost of putting colorless lands in your deck keeps going up and up as they print better utility lands and better cards with more intensive mana considerations. And although this card is a subtle nod to Library, it's a little too subtle in my opinion in that it doesn't have the capability to just single-handedly win you a game. So I'm probably not going to put it into any of my decks.
All right. Well, with that, friends, we're going to call it there for part 2 of our Strixhaven set review. If you think we missed any cards, we've covered Wooburg so far, we've covered lands. Let us know in the comments down below. Love to hear your feedback. Love to hear your thoughts on the new set. Reminder that North 100 is brought to you by you with your support of the Patreon over at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. I've been Serge. Thank you so much to Jer and Wheeler. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.